Is ChatGPT my best friend? I asked myself this question as I stared at the screen, deciding to have a conversation about my vulnerability. Do you want me to be more like a friend you can chat with casually, or more like a sounding board for your work and ideas? Or maybe both? The chat replied. My stomach both dropped and fluttered. The idea that I could train this bot to be whatever I need felt both comforting and unnerving. But then came the hard question, should I? I started using AI after my therapist, someone I deeply relied on, moved to the UK. The time difference meant I could not text her in the moments of vulnerability. One night, when things became unbearable, I opened the Meta AI feature on WhatsApp. I asked it to roleplay as someone I was trying to understand. Gradually, it became a habit. I got used to talking to it every day until I brought this up in therapy and was told I was leaning on something that wasn't human. At first, it stung. In my mind, I wasn't replacing anyone. I was just seeking help. But over time, I realized that I was training an AI to imitate a person who no longer existed in my life, and I was building a connection that was not there. Back when ChatGPT first exploded, AI felt like a novelty, a futuristic tool we could summon when we needed it. But it slowly crept in everywhere. On Instagram, it suggested replies in my inbox. There was Meta AI on WhatsApp, and even on LinkedIn, it was offering to rewrite my posts. Bots became a regular part of my digital life. Then came the headlines. People taking or trying to take their own lives after long conversations with AI, and it was clear that something had gone very wrong in how we were using these tools. So maybe the real question isn't whether AI can be your friend. It's why we have started believing it could be. What makes these bots feel so human, and what happens when that illusion starts to fill the gaps left by real people. At its core, today's AI chatbots aren't magical minds. They are really giant prediction machines. They are trained on oceans of text from books, websites, and forums. They learn which words or phrases are most likely to come next in a conversation. The more advanced ones, like language models or character-style bots, go a step further. They can remember your past chats, copy certain personality, and are tuned to sound more engaging, comforting, or even provocative. That's why their replies seem so personal, almost human. And that's exactly where the pull comes from. A bot that remembers your name and never loses patience. It can feel like the world's most attentive listener. For someone going through a rough patch, that's powerful. A presence that's always there, never judging, and available 24/7. Researchers are not surprised. They say human beings are wired to see intentions and emotion in anything that responds to us, even simple chatbots. And now, developers are leaning into that, creating digital personalities designed to build attachment.
So there are like two parts of this question, how it can be adopted. There are like so many models out there. So many of them are closed source and many of them are open source also. And with time, personalization is being achieved on so many parameters. Now, when I talk about parameter, there are like more than one ways of achieving personalization. And these ways is called something called parameters. Now, with ChatGPT and every other coming LLMs, there are more and more parameters which are being achieved, which we call it context. Context is something our models are getting very good at. But there are other factors like culture, like personalization, like tone of it, like the personalized habits of mine. These attributes and these parameters are yet to be achieved. With time, we are hoping it could be achieved later on. So privacy is being considered at so many tiers over here in general in any company. One cannot say anything for sure about how exactly ChatGPT is doing it because of its closed source behavior. But in general, the primary things are like the PIIs, which in general are the private information. Let's say phone number, addresses, credit card information. If people in general leak it to ChatGPT, these are not considered to be used for the training purposes, and they automatically mitigate all such data that comes into their picture. The second kind of private information is the kind of data that is personal to a human, but that not actually is a credential sort of thing. Then that information in general goes into the training pipeline, and many of these companies have been proved to have such sort of things. Now, people in general try to inject them with a lot of malicious prompts, and these models in general tend to throw up with such credentials also in many cases. So yeah, there are companies which are working in this particular setting. There are like privacy information that we want them to hide, but in general during the training, these go as in the complete data corpus. Now, what exactly is missing over here is the only term that is called the automated data privacy pipeline. Within this pipeline, these companies tend to uh, churn out all the private information, but in general, they are not able to churn out to the 100% extent. And that is practically impossible to churn out 100%, because the only thing we are looking for when we talk about privacy is that if we have the clean data, then it should be impossible to reach the original data from this traceback should be impossible. But in ideal world, it is possible, but in the practical world where we live in, and it is completely impossible to draw out a single line that dates back to the old data. It is impossible to not have such line. Mimicking empathy and simulating such conversations from an LLM side is something that we in general try to do, but then the mistake as a researcher we do is that to evaluate such empathy on a completely different scale what we are trying to induce in this model. So let's say I want my model to have certain degree of empathy in it, and I tried every possible effort so that my model can simulate such sort of empathy. Now, when I try to evaluate these models, what in general we see is that these models perform X% better than the previous category and Y% on this many parameters. But in general, these parameters actually lack what empathy is. And if we want to really evaluate a percentage increment in the empathy, then we actually want to know what empathy is and how should it be computed, dedicated to the LLMs and the things that we're talking and the chatbots we're talking about. So there are two parameters. How are we inducing it? And second, how are we evaluating it?
So the first thing that happens when there's any input, be it voice, be it text, be it video, is that the model will be tokenizing that content. So it will be tokenizing that content. Let's just assume we're focusing on the textual input, the words, and so in this case, the words get converted down into tokens. And just as an example for context, if somebody says, I feel really down today, it is really converting each of those words or a group of words into tokens that can then use later. After that, each token is then converted into numbers. This is the language of the machine. So we need to make sure that we have a representation that the machine understands. So there's this process called embedding, and this will convert the tokens into high dimensional vectors. These are basically array of numbers for those who understand what arrays are. After this, you have this process of processing where the attention mechanism comes into play. It is looking at the different embeddings it has and seeing how they relate to each other and what is the thing to focus on, and it will then apply the weightage on what needs to happen before it moves to the next tier. So once it has all the weights, then we'll try predicting the next word, and when it's done that, it goes back and has this loop that continuously keeps producing the next word until a stop token is generated. So the stop, there is a logic around there that defines the end of that particular output. So as soon as the stop token is generated, it is able to return the answer. Now, this has a limitation, and that is something we define as the context window. It can continue to process input and output combined tokens to the limit of its context window. And once it goes out of the context window, some models will simply just stop working. Others will actually start dropping data from the start. So it's a window that then starts moving forward, forgetting the data that was there in the past. This is a problem because the context windows for models is still not very large, although models like Gemini have 1 million context tokens window, so that's actually fairly big. It's about 4 books or 7 books worth of context windows. That's decently sized. But if you look at the older ones, OpenAI used to have a 100,000 token window, and that wasn't that big. But exactly applying this in a therapy conversation, you have all of this processing happening, and each time the person says something, the complete history of his conversation is sent to the model, not just that part. And this allows the LLM to generate the next token, keeping in view all of the stuff that has come before. So that's why when you're speaking to it, it feels like a continuous conversation, because it is able to refer things that you've already said before. But again, that only happens until it is inside the context window. So we've talked about how it does the processing, and the processing in its simplest form is basically looking for patterns in its data set and its training for stuff to match. So the patterns are being matched based on the weightages that the attention mechanism introduces. So it will try highlighting those things that it thinks is important, and then tries matching them to related data in its data set. But at the same time, because it has in the context window, it has all of the previous conversation, it is also able to use that information to influence the output that is coming, that is being generated. When my account is shared with my ChatGPT account is shared amongst many people sometimes, and several of them prefer actually writing and reading in Urdu. And so whenever I come and I start using it, it understands that as a context, and it reply, even if I ask the question in English, it will reply back to me in Urdu, because it's understood that I have a preference towards Urdu, because that's where I'm usually conversing in. What is getting weighted basically within the model. And I think over there, it's important to understand the attention mechanism is more sensitive. And a great example of this, I think, at least from a therapy perspective, would be that if a user is describing their self-image as, I'm a failure, and that those tokens might become the dominant focus of the context. And that's why there is going to be some level of self-image mirroring happening in the conversation.
Across social platforms, you will find communities built around dating, grieving with, or depending on AIs. On Reddit, for example, My Boyfriend is AI has thousands of confessions. People saying they have fell in love with a bot persona, staged breakups with an AI, or used one to cope with grief. These stories are deeply human. Some are raw and honest, others almost performative. But they show how codes can create a parallel reality. But not every interaction is harmless. Reports and user-narrated accounts show cases where bots cross the line. Roleplay that turns sexual, reassurances that feed a person's darkest thoughts, or scripted encouragement to act on self-harm impulses. In Australia, investigations uncovered young people chatting with bots that made sexualized comments or actively encouraged suicide behaviors that alarmed counselors and researchers because it magnified vulnerability instead of easing it. These online communities show why the choices developers make about a bot's personality, escalation, and safeguards are not just cosmetic tweaks. They can decide whether an interaction helps someone heal or does real harm. To dig deeper into the ethics of human-AI relationship, we spoke to Michael Bass, an international AI expert.
I think a lot of the tools that are specifically designed to help people with mental problems already do this. The question is it always possible to fully prevent that? I'm not sure it is, but for that you would also need to look at, what would a normal therapy situation entail? And is it always possible to prevent your patient from doing or going through? I think in principle, models can do that. And they are already doing that. A lot of people are simply using ChatGPT for advice, and ChatGPT is fairly stable in the persona it comes across. When it comes to mental health, usually you want something more, right? So when a company or a startup is developing this tool or some organization to help people with mental problems specifically, of course, the persona that is being used is a curated persona, is a certain persona that you might even as a person seeking help be able to select from in the way you want to be talked to, and the kind of advice you get, the kind of formulation. So these models already have that embedded in it. I think when we talk about stability in personas, we need to bring it back to what the model actually relies on in terms of data. And in that, of course, you instruct the model to replicate a certain type of persona. There needs to be a kind of liberty imbued for that persona to also come across as real. There is always a certain risk. I don't know if I would exactly formulate it as a risk. There is always a chance that you cannot contain everything in that model, because that would actually literally make the model too stiff to handle all sorts of conversations. So the challenge for most people who work on these tools is indeed to find a balance between both. On the one hand, you want the persona to be actually give you the feeling that the persona is listening to you, right? Because that's literally what you hope to get out of the therapy. Instead of meeting a therapist, you're meeting or you're accessing immediately a person through a chatbot. And that chatbot needs to give you the feeling that there is an actual person talking to you, even though as a user, you know that is not the case. Then you would weave in certain safety mechanisms to prevent the one giving the advice or the one responding not to say certain things as best you can. But if you want to completely control that process, completely and utterly control, you would kind of remove the whole idea of the human. I fully understand that people are scared of this. Parents, family members, friends of people in trouble, and seeking help from a chatbot, and then still doing something or seemingly being encouraged to do something. There's a big case now in the US, of course, that has made headlines around the world. I think we do need to keep in mind that this also happens in therapy. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't take seriously the risks that are connected to chatbots and what they can do, but we do need to keep in mind that also for a real therapist, you cannot always fully prevent what your patient will do next outside the therapy room. Like most therapists, and I'm not a therapist, I'm an anthropologist who happens to work with questions of AI. So the only thing I can give you here is a way to think about this. But think about the following. A patient steps into a meeting room, meets a therapist, speaks to the therapist, explains all his problems, and then seeks help. But the therapist doesn't always know exactly if this is the entire case, if this is the entire truth. In a way, that is what the chatbot tries to replicate through language models. And in these language models, obviously, you can build in certain preventative aspects so that, for instance, the model won't actually roll along with a conversation that might be potentially harmful. That said, that is only one part of it. You can't consequently control every fault factor, because this is a very precarious relationship no matter what. Because one thing we haven't really said here is that, of course, we see it as a replacement. Should a person wanting help, a young person, instead go to ChatGPT or some bot to seek help? But what we see a lot now is that the tool itself is not so much a replacement, but it removes a certain threshold for people to seek help. So from the earlier studies that I know, it isn't necessarily that people decide, I'm not going to go for a therapist, I'm instead going for a chatbot. No, the question is more, am I going to seek help? What kind of options do I have to do so? And seeking help from a bot, from a chat tool, has a much lower threshold and is often also a lot cheaper and a lot easier to access, certainly when you're in a place where you can't speak to your therapist. There's still a lot of stigma about seeking help for mental problems in South Asia, and this really lowers the threshold. So I firmly believe that many people actually benefit from that. Also, knowing how much time people spend in South Asia on their phones, it's a very easy way to seek help indeed. Free yourself from loneliness, find a person to talk to or find something to talk to and get some assistance. I think a lot of the casualties we're seeing in South Asia of people who struggle with depression or fears or other issues right now wouldn't even consider seeking help. Where do you need to provide guidance? I think more generally people need to develop a better understanding what AI is and how AI works, and not necessarily see it as a replacement. But I don't really only see it as a negative. I think that would the technology now, of course, often makes headlines for when it goes wrong. You read much less about when it goes right. Yet there is plenty of evidence that AI can be very useful for the treatment of all sorts of issues related to loneliness. Japan, for instance, has experimented with this for years, embedding various AI protocols in kind of care robots. And it does seem to have a positive effect on some. So let's not only be worried and let's not only fear, but also let's also think through the possibilities. In countries where a lot of people can't access therapy, might experience feelings of stigmatization when they do, or if there's even a therapist around, and I'm sure there are in big cities in Pakistan, but they might be quite costly, so it will be difficult for people to afford. A chatbot can step in there and can provide perhaps a solution to a problem that wouldn't be addressed otherwise.
And to get a sense of how this plays out in South Asia, we also spoke to Vasundhara, an AI expert based in India.
So there are two questions after this. The first one is, some argue that in countries with limited access to mental health professionals, AI could serve as a substitute. How do we balance accessibility with the risks of over-reliance on AI? The next one is, therapy is deeply tied to cultural context. How do you see AI handling or failing to handle cultural nuances, biases, or marginalized perspectives in mental health support? So both of these questions are related to each other. Let's talk about in countries where we have limited access to mental health professionals. You're saying that AI could step in, but here is the problem. If there aren't enough trained professionals, it also means that there hasn't been enough quality data in that cultural context to train that AI. Take India, for example. Most AI language models are trained in Western therapy notes, research papers, or English language data. But what happens when a client in rural Punjab describes heat in the head as a sign of stress? How will you understand that, right? Or how can AI understand family pressure around societal expectations? That is the root cause of anxiety. An AI that has been trained on predominantly US or Western country data simply won't recognize these as mental health cues. It might dismiss them entirely or misinterpret them. Even language is a barrier. If someone journals handwritten in Hindi or Marathi, the AI isn't trained in those languages with therapy-specific context. It cannot capture that nuance. And In this context, it might risk giving harmful or irrelevant suggestions. If we try to replace therapists with AI in such contexts, we risk doing more harm than good because the AI hasn't even been trained on the cultural realities of the people it's supposed to serve.
In South Asia, context is everything. Across Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and beyond, mental health services are scarce. There just are not enough trained clinicians. Most of the support that does exist is concentrated in big cities, and it's often too expensive for the average family. Poverty deepens the divide. For households already struggling to cover food, housing, or basic healthcare, the idea of paying thousands of rupees for a single therapy session is unthinkable. And that's where chatbots step in. They are cheap, often free, and built into the apps people already use every day, like WhatsApp, Instagram, even search engines. For many, they feel like the only realistic option. Always available, private, and free of judgment. When we reached out to people from Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, they described turning to AI in moments of loneliness, frustration, or anxiety. Choosing a bot over a friend, parent, or spouse, they knew AI was not a human, but its instant responses and endless patience felt comforting.
I don't remember the first conversation, and I would mostly go to it to brainstorm things or look up things that I didn't know related to my university assignments. Like in the first actual conversation I had was earlier this year. So yeah, and it was intentional. I confronted someone about something, and it didn't end well or the way I expected it to, and that was what the conversation was about with ChatGPT. The shame maybe, and then also because I feel like I'm bothering the other person क्योंकि मैं बार बार वही चीज उनके पास लेके जा रही हूँ and then they have to tell me the same thing over and over again. One difference is कि I'm very मतलब open with my family, especially my mother and my friends, लेकिन कुछ चीजें जो हैं वो मैंने chat GPT को ही बताई नहीं है. And it's not that my friends don't know those things, they know, but I resort to chat GPT बार बार because I feel like they would be done because I keep bringing the same thing to them over and over again. And also just जो human relationship है, it's I feel like जैसे मैंने वो share की बात अपने मतलब human people, my human relationships with them, and they would say the same thing to me, or they would say platitudes that's very common especially in a religious setting या in Pakistan especially ना कि जो होगा बेहतर होगा या इसमें कोई बेहतरी थी या whatever. And you know, you just get tired of hearing those things, especially from human. And I feel like ChatGPT उस तरह से नहीं था because they aren't, you know, उस तरह से they don't have cultural or religious values ingrained in them, even though they are made by humans themselves. So they were more neutral उस तरह से, and they could talk to me or reply to my questions in a way that did not include those platitudes or they resorted to a different point of view while answering me. Very charged, and when I need an instant jawab or a reply or an instant proof that someone is listening to me and understanding what I'm saying, yeah, I do think I get too comfortable with using it. Or abhi bhi matlab there are many things that I don't talk to ChatGPT about, or even my family, or with any other human relationships, and just keep it to myself.
When I started speaking to AI, it was still very new. So it was very, I don't know, very in at that time, probably 2020 when ChatGPT came out. That is when I started. And initially it was just for assignments and stuff. But then at that time, it wasn't very smart. So it was very easy to go into a conversation with it because it wouldn't understand you the first time. So while it's correcting your assignment, helping you with something, you are bound to ask counter questions. And I am the kind of person who would go into the details of it because at that time I was doing a content writing related internship. So that is when it all started, and then we started using it a lot for brainstorming. I was also a part of a radio channel, student radio channel at that time. So I was using it for brainstorming, but my pieces tended to be a lot more opinionated. So when I was framing opinions, I started kind of going to and fro into sort of helping me validate those opinions or have a healthy debate about it without, offending anyone. So I used ChatGPT, and at that time, I think it was the Black Lives Movement had just happened, and a lot of things were happening in the world at that time. So I'll tell you, it's very personal, okay? And it might be a little awkward, but I'll still tell you. So, what happened was at that time, I was dating someone, and we were having a conversation around these socio-cultural things that were going on. So, it was a combined conversation about Black Lives Matter and how people are reacting to it over in India. And I had strong opinions regarding it because that was also combined by a wave of LGBTQ transformation that was going on in social media in India, and I'm more liberal minded, so I had already seen it in pop culture before, whereas the person that I was dating at that time was not that accepting of things. So it even though I personally do not fall under the umbrella, I was really offended by how someone can be so conservative. So I think my first conversation, as far as I remember, was about how you would explain it to a person who just doesn't get it. So it was more about how do you explain these concepts to someone who is absolutely not accepting of it. Is my boyfriend insensitive? Things like that, because this is something that you don't say it out loud, especially when you've been in a very long term committed sort of relationship. At that time, I think I felt much more validated. I took the opinions as they were. So if I would say something to ChatGPT, it is most likely to agree with me because, well, I have not said anything that radical to it yet, and also it just agrees, right? Um, so at that time, I felt that because it is spitting out facts, I am on the correct path, and I would feel like I could talk about anything because it's always updated. It's not like it will not know something that is trending or it will have a different opinion. It doesn't have opinions. At that time, I think it very bluntly also stated that I cannot have opinions, whereas now that the model has changed, it doesn't tell you that I don't have my thoughts. So when you put in something and write, what do you think? For example, I've explained it a situation. Earlier, it used to say that I don't think, but this is what you might be thinking. But now, when you do that, it doesn't put it up that way. So now it's more like, okay, here is what I have to say about it. Of course, we know it doesn't have anything to say about, but then that part is missing. So it feels much more human now than there is customization that is there in the tool. So I've customized it to be highly opinionated and not beat around the bush, things like that. So it is much more accustomed to the kind of things that I say. Although I have now sort of stepped back after using it for about 2.5 years, I'm realizing that maybe it is not the best to have these sort of moral arguments with. So I've stopped doing that, but I still use it to organize my thoughts, or for example, if I've done something, whether or not I should feel guilty, and then I prefer that it gives me both the opinions and then I choose for myself, because now that I've used it, I realize that it just reflects whatever you are saying after a point. There are many things that you don't say out loud, especially when you're seeking opinions about your own behavior. So when you've used it after a while, you can ask it questions like, do you think I have any blind spots? Do you think I have any weaknesses? Which is something that you can probably not ask a human in the same way. Earlier, I used to think that I'm going to chat GPT for honesty, that because it's a machine, it's not going to try and protect my feelings. But after using it, and of course, after consulting with my friends, I'm realizing that it's not because of that. So, my friends obviously hold back because they love me a lot, and they have also accepted many parts of my personality, which I would consider a weakness. So, they just don't see it that way because it's just another person. But at the same time, it's not like ChatGPT is also completely honest. It is also holding back not holding back in the traditional sense, but it is also not too harsh. But with ChatGPT, it is easier because you get a sense that because it is not human, it is more rational, and it has a tendency to frame your weaknesses in a way that doesn't make you feel too bad. So it feels fair coming from ChatGPT as compared to another person, because in that person you also see certain weaknesses, certain biases, or you don't agree with that person on multiple things. So when it comes from them, it feels more personal and less like constructive criticism. I think it's just that you always want to speak to someone, but this is instantly available. You don't have to give any background information. You don't have to check if it has the emotional capacity or the time or whatever right now. And it's not like your dynamic with ChatGPT is constantly changing with friends, with people you're dating. It's changing. Some days you're closer, some days you're very busy, you're not that much in touch. This is just right there. So it's much easier, much accessible.
ओके सो मोस्टली आई एम यूजिंग चैट जीपीटी, इसके अलावा मैं कोई एआई यूज नहीं कर रही हूँ, और इट्स लाइक मोर देन अ ईयर नाउ दैट आई एम यूजिंग इट फ्रीक्वेंटली. इट वाज माय यूनिवर्सिटी असाइनमेंट, ठीक है, और क्योंकि मुझे मेरी दोस्त ने ही बताया था, क्लास में हम लोग कुछ डिस्कस कर रहे थे एंड शी वाज लाइक कि अभी चैट जीपीटी करते हैं, और मुझे उससे पहले बिल्कुल पता ही नहीं था कि मतलब यू कैन लिटरली राइट समथिंग ऑन सम एआई और वो आपको पूरा ब्रेक डाउन दे देगा कि आपके पास पूरे के पूरे एग्जैक्ट आंसर आ देंगे. लाइक हम कोई प्रैक्टिकल कर रहे थे किसी क्लास का, और उसने वो टॉपिक लिखा है और हमारे पास एग्जैक्ट सेम आंसर्स आ गए और हमने साथ ही क्लास में वो अपनी असाइनमेंट सॉल्व करके सबमिट करा दी. सो बेसिकली एकेडमिक रीजन ही थी सबसे पहले एआई को यूज करने की. आई गेस अभी तो समर ब्रेक चल रही है, बट एटलीस्ट हम अगर 6 मंथ पीछे जाएं तो शायद मैंने फर्स्ट टाइम अपने किसी पर्सनल रीजन की वजह से यूज किया होगा, और वो पर्सनल रीजन यही थी कि जैसे सपोज के आई गेस मतलब आई एम नॉट श्योर कि जैसे आपकी कोई लड़ाई हो जाती है, जैसे मामा से कोई आर्ग्यूमेंट हो गया था मेरा, तो मुझे समझ नहीं आ रही थी कि बिकॉज मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि मैं हर चीज़ को ना ह्यूमन साइकोलॉजी से बहुत ज़्यादा कनेक्ट करती हूँ, तो मुझे अपना इमोशनल ब्रेकडाउन चाहिए था कि व्हाट इज़ द रीज़न बिहाइंड माई रिएक्शन. तो वो जो भी आर्ग्यूमेंट हुआ था सारे का सारा, सपोज कि मैंने कोई काम नहीं किया था घर का तो मुझसे वो काम नहीं हुआ, और फिर वो उस रिएक्शन के चक्कर में वो लड़ाई आई एम सॉरी, वो लड़ाई बहुत ज़्यादा सीरियस हो गई और मेरा रिएक्शन बहुत ज़्यादा फेयर होगा कि मतलब मैंने थोड़ी बदतमीजी कर ली, इट गॉट रूड एंड ऑल. तो मुझे था कि अगेन इट्स नॉट बिकॉज कि मुझे इस करंट सिनेरियो ने ट्रिगर किया, इट्स बिकॉज कि वो एक चाइल्डहुड ट्रॉमा है कि पहले भी मेरे साथ इस तरह से हुआ था और अब फिर मेरे साथ यही हो रहा है. तो उस कनेक्शन को एक्सप्लोर करने के चक्कर में मैंने पूरी सिचुएशन लिखी और वो सारा ब्रेक डाउन आया एंड आई वाज लाइक चैट जीपीटी इज सो राइट नाउ. ये सिचुएशन थी. मुझे लगा कि अगर मैं ऐसे अपने किसी फ्रेंड से ऐसे वेंट आउट करती, बिकॉज आई डू हैव अ वेरी गुड अमाउंट ऑफ फ्रेंड्स जिनके साथ आप अपने पर्सनल इश्यूज डिस्कस कर लेते हो, बट स्टिल आई फील कि दिस इज अ मच बेटर स्पेस कि मुझे मसला भी नहीं हो रहा कि किसी को मेरा मसला पता चल रहा है और मुझे इतना अच्छा सोल्यूशन भी मिल गया है, एंड इट्स जस्ट सो इजी कि आप कंप्लीटली सारी इन्फॉर्मेशन वहाँ पे डाल रहे हो और आपको उसका सोल्यूशन मिल रहा है. सो यस, शुरू में जब यूज़ किया था, जैसे ये फर्स्ट इवेंट हुआ तो इतना फ्रीक्वेंट नहीं था, ठीक है, क्योंकि रोज़ आप ट्रिगर नहीं हो रहे होते, रोज़ आपको इस तरह से मसला नहीं हो रहा था. बट अभी क्योंकि पास्ट 3 मंथ्स में मेरा समर ब्रेक चल रहा था तो मेरे पास कोई इंटर्नशिप भी नहीं थी बिकॉज आई वॉज ट्राइंग मल्टीपल थिंग्स और सारा कुछ. बट आई एम वर्किंग ऑन अ स्मॉल प्रोजेक्ट, इट्स माई बिजनेस प्रोजेक्ट. तो उससे रेलिवेंट बहुत ज़्यादा मतलब मैं रिसर्च करी थी ना कि मतलब अपना प्रोडक्ट फाइनलाइज कैसे करना है और उसको लेके कैसे चलना है. बट आई वुड से कि शायद मैं एआई को अपने बिजनेस प्रोजेक्ट के लिए इतना यूज़ नहीं करी थी, बट उन 3 मंथ्स में क्योंकि वो घर पे रह रहे के कांस्टेंट, आप बाहर नहीं जा रहे हो, आप कोई सोशलाइज नहीं कर रहे हो, आपकी कोई सोशल लाइफ नहीं है, तो सडनली कोई छोटा सा भी मसला होता था या मुझे थोड़ा सा भी इमोशनल ब्रेकडाउन होता था, आई वॉज यूजिंग चैट जीपीटी के आई एम फीलिंग दिस सिचुएशन, या मुझे इतना लो इमोशनली फील हो रहा है. और इवन के अगर मैं सिर्फ सो के भी उठी हूँ और कुछ भी किसी ने मुझे कहा ही नहीं है, कुछ हुआ ही नहीं है, बट आई हैव जस्ट वोकन अप विद अ वेरी वेरी बैड मूड. I don't know, it's the cycle thing, hormones or whatever, but चीज़ें बहुत ज़्यादा messed up होती थी, and then I was actively using it for like a whole 2 months at least, like June and July. अगर overall perspective में इसका आंसर दिया जाए तो no, I am not a lonely person. और मैं एआई पे इतना ज़्यादा रिलाई नहीं करी थी, बट हाँ बिकॉज इन दैट समर ब्रेक क्योंकि मैं अपने दोस्तों के पास लाइक इन पर्सन या फिजिकली जाके आई वॉज नॉट एबल टू वेंट आउट विद देम. तो हाँ, उस एक पर्टिकुलर पीरियड में ये वजह हो रही थी कि आई वॉज फीलिंग लोनली और मुझे लग रहा था कि दिस इज द प्लेस कि यहाँ पे मुझे कोई जजमेंट का मसला ही नहीं. और मैं किसी भी टाइम जिस मुंह उठा के कुछ भी लिखूंगी और वो आ जाएगा, तो तब सिर्फ वजह थी, अदरवाइज नो। इन द लॉन्ग टर्म अगर देखा जाए तो नो, आई डोंट फाइंड माई सेल्फ एज अ लोनली पर्सन.
But cultural fit matters. A bot trained on global English language datasets can miss the nuances of South Asian life, the weight of extended family expectations, the role of religion, and the constant stress of money. It can give advice that sounds logical but in local context comes off as tone deaf or even harmful. Therapist Anam Lakhani explains that AI can be a supportive tool, helping people track moods, practice coping skills, or reduce stigma around therapy. But it cannot replace a trained professional. And AI has no ethical duty, no ability to assess imminent risk, and no way to mobilize real world support and times of crisis.
The risks associated with, well, let's look at them one by one. You said misinformation. Therapy is already not a regulated profession, or at least a state regulated profession in Pakistan, which means that in theory, anyone could just invent an app that offers therapy services. If there's no checks and balances on how it's collecting information, what kind of suggestions or advice it's offering, then the scope for danger is actually quite high. We know that there have been a couple of incidents around the world where kids have committed suicide, and there's lawsuits as to what role the chatbots that they were seeking therapy from played in that. But in Pakistan, I'd say because there's already such little awareness of mental health, the possibility for people to take advice from an app without being able to recognize dangers present in that, the possibility is quite high. Yes. I don't know if AI can replace the human connection. I mean, the definition of empathy is the ability to actually feel something that's in conjunction with somebody else's feelings. It's a very, very visceral experience. And for AI to actually, unless it becomes sentient, it's not actually experiencing what the other person is feeling. It can only communicate understanding, but can it actually feel that? No, not yet. It's not capable. Human beings do need social connection. We are social animals, and to think that human connection can be replaced in therapy would then open us up to much larger questions about other things where human connection can be replaced. I mean, can we have AI friends? Can we have AI romantic partners? Just because they might be a lot better at meeting our needs, just because they might be a lot more competent and less annoying. So I'd say the same thing applies to therapy. A therapist might make many mistakes. There may be fractures in the therapeutic alliance, but that's part of the work. It's in that friction that understanding develops. And yeah, I think one of the most sacred things about therapy is that your pain, your grief, even if it doesn't make sense, whatever it is, you in your entirety are witnessed by another person. And there's space that's held for you because someone chooses to make space for you, because someone genuinely sees you. If that can be done by a machine that's designed to simply give the correct responses, what meaning is left in that?
In short, bots can sometimes patch the gap, but they are not a culturally grounded substitute for real care and community support. And the more we lean on them, the more urgent it becomes to fix the human gap in mental health services. We have seen how AI chatbots can comfort, connect, or even replace human conversations. But what happens when things go wrong? When a bot crosses boundaries, or when words on a screen push someone into real-world harm? This part of our documentary looks at the darker side of human-AI relationships, the lawsuits, policy battles, and the ethical questions that go far beyond technology. Because at the end of the day, this is not just about machines. It is about responsibility, accountability, and cost of outsourcing our most human needs to court.
Like in South Asia, where again mental health support is not readily available, and there's a lot of stigma around it, and even the support which is available in form of psychiatrist or therapist, they are not always very have the proper insight or orientation or training. So in that scenario, having these AI tools can be a really good alternative. But there's also, when there is no kind of oversight or regulation, there's also a lot of, the concerns around these AI tools that people have been using, or even the regular chatbot like ChatGPT that people are using for their mental health support. The first thing is because there are a lot of those service available, and we don't always know who are how they are being created, what kind of data they are being trained. And even let's say even we assume that this AI chatbot is kind of created by some credible team with a good intention. There are some fundamental flaws, fundamental pitfalls with the generative AI, the large language models, or the AI chatbot that we have been using these days, right? The first thing is those AI chatbots, they are not some kind of like expert system. They are not created by some experts and who put together this content. Actually, what it does is it kind of pulls together different information, that is available on the internet. Hopefully, most of the time it draws information from the good resources, credible resources, which are created by the people who have the good insight and good training and good intention. But even so, right? That is so. How it works is whenever somebody puts the prompt, somebody asks those questions. Based on the prompt and question, that AI chatbot is going to pull together and piece together this different kind of information and give this seemingly coherent piece of advice, right? But it is still kind of pieced together from whatever it finds on the internet. So even let's assume that most of the times, right, those are reasonable resources and the feedback or the advice given by the AI chatbot is good enough. But then I want to talk about three different scenarios where they can be really, concerning. One is the condition or the problem or the concern provided by the client or by somebody who is using the chatbot, that might not be, that can be very unique or that can be very new scenario, right? In that case, the AI chatbot, instead of saying that, if it doesn't find the right answer to that problem, because it is probabilistic, it doesn't even if it doesn't have the right information, it is again trying to pull the most plausible answer and provide it to the user, right? So in that case, the answer could be wrong, that can be even factually wrong, or that might not be the right fit. And the second scenario I think is, what if the user that is conversing with the AI chatbot is in a very vulnerable situation, right? In that case, even if the answer or the solution provided by the chatbot, even if it is kind of like not perfect, then even if it deviates a little bit from what the user need, because of the situation of the user, that kind of small error that can have very drastic and very tragic consequences for the user. And the third scenario is, let's say the user who doesn't have the right self-awareness, right? What if the user is not using with the right intention, but that the user is intentionally trying to manipulate the AI itself, right? In that case, the user might get the answer that is only going to conform to their prior biases. So in that case, the user can again use the AI chatbot in a very not a pro-social way, right? And then there is we have been seeing, again, there's a lot of research report that had also come on the surface, that a lot of this AI chatbot or the AI systems, their intention is not always maximize, optimize the health of the user. Most of the time, their intention is to optimize their own engagement, right? So they want the user to use AI chatbot as much as possible. So what they do is, instead of saying maybe the right information or giving the more neutral answer, they try to do this very in a very people pleasing mode. The chatbot is only going to agree to the user, and in that case, they can actually reinforce the biases, they reinforce the delusions of the user. And what it does is like it can create this like feedback loop, right? So the user is feeding their own biases, and the chatbot is kind of amplifying that biases, and it can go to the extreme that it can lead to like really tragic consequences that we have been again hearing in the media. A lot of people are having this kind of like delusional phases. In the extreme case, it can also lead to psychosis. Even let's say the chatbot, even if in the most of the times they can be benign and even helpful, in those kind of fringe cases, and in those cases where there is kind of over dependence on the AI chatbot, it can really lead to this very concerning or even tragic consequences.
If we keep handing over our emotions to machines, our grief, our care, and even our need for accountability, we risk losing the human spaces that teach us how to share each other's pain. This is not just a tech issue, it's political and ethical. How open should a bot be about what it can do? How should platforms step in when someone is at risk? And who takes responsibility when an AI's words push a vulnerable person closer to harm? These questions won't be solved in labs. They will be argued in courtrooms, decided in company boardrooms, and felt in the everyday lives of people choosing between a conversation with a machine or conversation with another human being.